Welcome to HortTube. My name is John Putnam. We're at Sandbanks Provincial Park in Ontario, right on the northern part of Lake Ontario, and you can see why they call this place Sandbanks. It looks like the Outer Banks out here. We were told yesterday this is actually the most popular provincial park in Ontario, and there are a lot of provincial parks. We're staying at 4 of them. We're heading to another one this morning after we filmed this, and they're just, if you open a map, pretty much anywhere there's a provincial park, and there's camping opportunities either in a tent or RV, whatever, and all of them, and they're all unique. It's so interesting as you think you've seen it, but if you think you've seen it all, you move 60 miles up the road and there's something completely different, like sand dunes on the lake. This is a kind of a bonus question and answer video that we're going to do midweek. We've been getting way more questions than we've been answering in the Q&A, so we figured we'd do an extra one. And again, I'm still going to do a live Q&A, but the internet's spotty in places up here, so we'll figure that out maybe back home when that happens. At this point, we're not that far from heading home at this point. Ultimately, heading up to Montreal and then heading for home. Let's see. I'll get to some questions in just a second. I did put a $40 discount for the weekly garden planner in place, and you can use the code September with a capital S to get the $40 off for the month of September. The month of October will be up in the next week or so. Right now, we've got March through September on the weekly garden planner. October has been shot. Jim is needing to edit it and get it up, and then November is prepared to shoot. As soon as we get home, we'll have November up as well. So weekly garden planner, $40 off for September. One thing I'd point out here, we've pointed out lots of solidago around as we've been going. Again, it's become a joke over on Instagram if you want to follow me over there at HortTube. Basically every photo I've put up has included some sort of solidago. One thing that's super interesting here in this park, and all over, but it's been more so here at Sandbanks, is these galls that are underneath right there. So there is a fly that comes along, lays an egg right below where the flower parts are going to form on the solidago, and then once it hatches, it buries its way down in the flesh, down in the meristem, and the meristem is what produces growth in the plant and allows the plant, basically builds this gall itself, and then the maggot, and it is a maggot because it is a fly, is residing in there, but it actually doesn't stop the plant from flowering. You see this new growth above that gall? That it will end up forming flowers just like the other one. So it doesn't seem to have all that big of a negative impact on the solidago, and they're not all the plants have it. It's, it's like one in 30, something like that, have these galls on them. And again, those was a bad example because this one doesn't have the new growth on it, but most all of them you'll see in full flower like this, and the gall sitting right below the base of where the flowers are. So anyway, that's interesting. There's some horsetail here. I don't think it belongs. It definitely doesn't belong here for sure, but it is holding some of this bank in place for sure, because I guess, with this kind of traffic in a park like this, it's probably causing some of this sand to change more than they would like it. We're going to see some interesting plants on the trail back here as we go through this video. Okay, jumping into your gardening questions, and I think we have 20 of them this week, or for this video. Somebody has a Japanese maple in a container. It's grown about 3 feet this year. Can they plant it in the fall? Definitely. Japanese maples are definitely one thing that is great for fall planting. And again, it's going to be, I can't say this enough this time of year because I'm going to get tons of questions about moving things from containers into the ground or whether I should plant it or not plant it. The only things I'm not planting are things that have water sensitivity, because when we disturb the ground in the fall, the ground tends to be wetter during the winter, and we can get root rot on some of those things. They don't come back as well, or they shrink during the winter sometimes, and that can be some ornamental grasses and anything that's kind of sensitive to wet feet. But when we're talking about shrubs and things, they're all almost 100% across the board going to be better off in the ground than they are in that container raised above the ground if you're not going to be able to protect it, the container during the winter time. The exception to that would be if you're planting something that's only zone 7 hardy and you're in zone 6, that would be not probably one that would go in the ground. That's one that's probably going to need to go in your garage some. So if it's really, really cold sensitive to your area and you're getting it on a discount and you want to know what to do with it, that one's one I'm going to store for the winter. Okay, second question, is Joe Pye weed easy to divide? Yes, and you can fall divide it or spring divide it, your choice. I like to fall divide things. We may shoot a video on that when we get back home. There's a few things that need to be popped out of the ground and divided. There's a few things we need to pop out of the ground and either give away or dispose of that have just taken a little more space than we wanted them to take. And we may go ahead and take the opportunity here in the fall to do that. But there's a lot of our perennials do wait for most of that energy to get sucked down into the roots though. You know, what we're happening right now, and we're early on the fall color up here, but what's in the process of happening is these plants are taking the last of the food that these leaves have made and pulling it down into the roots and storing it in their roots for the winter time. And then they're basically unveiling the true color of the leaves. You know, if it's red or oranges or yellows or whatever. And they're taking that food down. You want to wait for that process to happen, whether it's a herbaceous perennial or a tree or a shrub or whatever it is. Let it pull that energy back down into the ground and then move it. So you're moving it with, you know, that stored energy. So for us in Raleigh, it's going to be a while before our perennials have died back. Up here in, you know, southern Ontario, it's not going to be, you know, but just a few more weeks before most of this is going to color up. Funny thing is, we're leaving the area before the color comes and the crowd of people come up here to see all the color. One thing I'd point out about that horsetail, we've seen Thuja occidentalis and some other native plants back up here in these sand dunes that we had not actually seen in other places. So I'm wondering if that horsetail is actually just endemic to this sand out here and probably wasn't actually brought here. It is all over the northern hemisphere, but any place I've ever seen horsetail, had been introduced to that space by someone and had just eaten an area because, you know, it's so aggressive. But that horsetail back there may actually just be may have just already been here, because again, there's other things up here in this sand. I just don't know that as I'm looking at it, but it's good at holding that sand in place, that's for sure. I came over here to this very healthy stand of poison ivy just to talk about the fall color, because you know, again, we're not seeing any fall color. This very healthy stand of poison ivy will definitely turn this bright red color. And I've always joked about making a video for the channel about the, you know, plants with just tremendous fall color and just doing a lot of our Virginia creeper, which is, you know, also native and has beautiful red fall color. Poison ivy has beautiful red fall color. Just doing a kind of a joke video of all the beautiful fall color plants that are also not wanted in our gardens necessarily. There's some false Solomon seal. We see lots of this. It seems to love this sandbar out here. It's got the red berries on it. It's coming up right through that poison ivy. We won't let Steph touch the poison ivy as she's filming up close there. But again, false Solomon seal growing in the middle of a very, very healthy stand of poison ivy, which is also the entrance to this beach. Which, you know, there's warning signs out here about how healthy the stands of poison ivy are out here. Okay, back to some questions. Somebody said they're glad there will be more plant-specific videos coming up, and that's going to happen as soon as we're back home. I'm going to take the 72 videos from the other channel, move them over here, and then we're going to be adding quite a few, and we've already shot a couple. So we're going to get on that pretty quickly, and notes for a bunch of others that we're going to be doing, and fill that out. Probably spend a lot of time this winter. That's a lot of what you're going to see on the channel. It's just lots of information about individual plants, which may help you in the planning for your gardens next year. If you're thinking about looking for things to fill certain needs in your garden, going to be lots of videos, you know, about that. Okay, fourth thing on the list here. Somebody has a weeping eastern white pine that said it's native, and we'll see some. We may see some eastern white pines in this video. They're maybe not. Up here on this sand, I don't see any, but as soon as we're out of this sand a little bit in some flat areas, there's beautiful stands of eastern white pines here. And eastern red cedars as well, or junipers virginiana stands. Don't seem to be as much up here in the as this path we're about to take in just a minute. Do you have to worry about soil-borne diseases if they're native? Yes. Unfortunately, disease issues. So whether we had imported disease issues or not imported disease issues, if plants are unhealthy, or let's say you're taking that eastern white pine, which really grows from the mountains of North Carolina, and we don't really see them in the wild until western Virginia and then up into where we are in Ontario, where they're very happy to be here. If you're taking that weeping eastern white pine and you're trying to grow it in Charleston, South Carolina, it's going to be under some sort of stress at times, and so it's going to be more apt to get disease problems, insect problems, and those could be native insects, could be native disease problems. And then of course now we have the issue of things have been brought by accident that have caused lots of our tree and shrub and other related issues to the country. And so now it may not be that the plants are even vulnerable to, they're not even in bad condition. They just never have seen this disease before. So they have no defense against it whatsoever. So even a healthy stand of trees can fall victim to that. So you're no more or less likely to get a soil-borne disease in a native versus a non-native necessarily. It's just more about whether something's been brought here that damages that pine specifically from some other place in the world, or again, due to heat-related issues with that plant, probably more than anything, it's under some sort of stress. And so it may probably more likely to succumb to an insect-related problem than a soil-borne disease-related problem, really, with that pushing the boundaries of, into heat-stressed areas. This fringed gentian is blooming all over the place. This is an actual native one to this area of eastern Canada and the eastern United States. There are a couple of couple species in this genus that are native to Southeast Asia, but these are so colorful. The flower's closed this morning, but you see a little fringed flower. It'll open up a little later in the day. Just so many interesting flowering things out here in the up here, very, very late summer into early fall. See the dogwoods. There's a cluster of them here inside of those dogwoods. Just really interesting. We find them just in pockets like this, where they've spread out in what looks like a slightly moist area at the bottom of this sand dune that's above us. This sand dune's probably, you're not going to get this on camera at all. It's like a 30, 40 foot tall sand dune right here beside of us. And at the base of it here, you have all of this life, all of these interesting flowering things, some native, some non-native. One native here is the Thuja occidentalis, which this is its native range up here. I've talked about this over the years on the channel. And we slide down here, Steph, and maybe get this whole group here. I've talked about this on the channel in the past, is that these eastern arborvitaes are actually native north of Pennsylvania. There's stands of them up in the highest mountains in North Carolina, Virginia, but really they're not truly native in lower areas until you get north of Pennsylvania even. So that one's always interesting to me, that we try to force the emerald arborvitae and all the others in very southern places and then wonder why they're struggling, because we see lines of them all over Raleigh where there's one dead here and one dead there. Of course, what the other weird thing though, and Steph pointed this out, is like when we see all of these outside of here in this park, the deer just go to town on them, on the bottoms of all the eastern arborvitaes, but we don't see really any damage in here. I don't know if it's just because of the wealth of material that they have available to them in here or not, but we don't see any real deer damage on them. But it's fun to see them actually in the wild spaces, and a plant that this is just a common ornamental plant in our garden. Same thing as the dogwood back there. Let's see. Where are we on here? Okay, somebody said, how tall will gold mop cypress really grow? very, very tall and 30 feet. Absolutely incredible. I always had the people that, well, I've said this before, you come to the farmer's market to buy plants from me and want the gold mops that stay really small, but gold mop cypress will get, I had a neighbor that kept his 18 inches tall for 20 years that I lived 4 houses from him. He pruned those things all summer long into little meatballs. And then there's one at Juniper Level Botanic Garden that's probably 25 feet tall for sure. You know, so as big as you want to let it get or as small as you want to keep it. They're really kind of adaptable. And sometimes I think about plants like that is, you know, it has that interesting chartreuse color, an interesting habit, moves around in the wind a bit, and it's just an interesting plant. Is maybe it just has a lifespan in my garden. You know, maybe I'm going to keep it for 10 years at whatever size I want to try to keep it, and then at some point I just got to let it go. It's okay to do that, to have a plant be, you enjoy it for some period of time, but know that it's going to outgrow the space someday, and that you can just remove it when that happens. Somebody has a Chinese snowball viburnum. It's blooming more now in the fall than it did in the spring. Is that normal? Yeah, that's exactly what, and there's a lot of viburnum that will repeat bloom in the late summer, and we've seen several of them up here in, you know, New York and southern Ontario, where we've seen viburnum with their kind of second round of flowering going on. But Chinese snowball viburnum, just pretty much 100% of the time, will throw some fall blooms. Sometimes it can be more in the spring, less in the fall, sometimes more in the fall, less in the spring. It sounded like this one was more newly planted, which would explain why it would have more the first fall than it did the spring when it went in the ground. We'll do one more here before we move on. Somebody was concerned that they had made a mistake by using uncomposted pine bark planting and fine mulch. I don't know what this fine mulch was, for planting some loropetalum and distilleum, and they're not exactly thriving. Should they dig them up and replant them with the correct pine mulch, is what they said. So the only thing I ever mixed in, you know, when I've shown planting plants, is some amount of compost will get mixed in, because our mulch breaks down in time and becomes a compost, or a compost that we've added to the topsoil gets mixed in, just because that's what happens when you dig a hole, right? The things that are on the top end up mixed into the whole thing. But the only addition that I've ever shown on the channel, outside of maybe a shovel full of compost or a shovel full of cow manure, a small shovel full of cow manure, would be really fine pine bark. So I don't know what it is that you planted, you planted in here. I don't know what this fine mulch thing is, but if it's just fine pine bark, that's totally fine. That's what was likely the loropetalum and the distilleum had. They were grown in the first place. So the fine pine bark is fine. I don't like to use large amounts of just like broken down composted materials that all come in those bags that are sold just everywhere now. And I'm not going to call it a company or call it a name. You all know what it is I'm talking about. They have fertilizer in them, and you know, they're it's black rich soil, so it must be great. It's just not great in our clay soils. And you know, I've called that stuff death in a bag for a long time for our clay soil plantings. I'm just careful with it. I'd rather put nothing in there, just have our native soil, or a small amount of compost if it makes you feel better, or some pine bark soil conditioner, which is just fine, literally really fine pine bark, just like the stuff is in the container. When you pull the plant out of the container, that's the material that's in there. That's all I ever want to mix in. If you've mixed in something more, if the plants are failing, yeah, I want to get them out of the ground and replant them. If the plants are just not, they're okay, but they're not perfect, that could just be first year planting issues. So I don't want to panic anybody in this type of situation, have you digging up plants and pulling them out. But when you plant something, it's okay just to put it in the ground with nothing. It's okay. And I know you're buying a $40 plant, so you want to make $1 million hole for it. But the native soil's probably okay, or a small amount of compost, or a small amount of pine bark soil conditioner. Don't go excessive on any of these things, because you can cause bigger problems by having basically a bowl full of organic material that all the water is going to find the bottom of that bowl, and your plants are going to suffer from being overwatered in all likelihood. One last point on that pine bark is it's not composted pine bark that you're necessarily looking for. You're just looking for fine pine bark. It doesn't compost particularly well and doesn't break down all that quickly. That's one of the reasons it's used in container mixes for growers, is it doesn't compost quickly, it doesn't break down. What would happen is if you put something in a container and you grew it for 18 months and that material broke down in the container, the soil in the container would shrink during that period of time. So you would have like this much where you started with this much in the container. So that's one of the other many reasons that pine bark's used. It's got a great pH for most of the plants. It's got air in it because it's light and fluffy, and then it doesn't break down all that quickly. And it's another reason we use it in the ground. So you don't have to worry about it being composted. It will just be fine pine bark material. This beautiful juniper next to me is common juniper. There's several stands of this growing with this habit in this sandy space. Literally, we're on a sand trail here. And there's just such interesting plants. And you'll see common junipers in different shapes and sizes, upright, spreading, narrow habit ones, all kinds of selections of these. But these are growing in the understory here. Just beautiful. Really, and like Steph said, here's a juniper in the wild that's probably as pretty as any juniper you'll ever see. I'm going to say it's 20 feet back to the back of it and maybe 15 feet wide, something like that. Okay, let's see. Somebody wanted to know if they could air layer their perennial hibiscus now. Is it okay to do it? It's probably not going to be the best time to air layer something that's about to go dormant to the ground. You know, they're herbaceous perennials and they're going to die completely back to the ground. And again, I'm talking about right now, you've got things are taking their energy and putting them back down into the ground as quick as they can as the nighttime temperatures get cooler. So it might not be the best time to air layer something that's herbaceous like that. It's definitely in the process of going to sleep. Air layering is just the process of either I can bend this limb down to the ground and cover it, or I can I can wound it and attach something to it and root it right here on the plant. Various ways to air layer a plant to create a new plant. Works great on this juniper because this juniper's evergreen, right? But that hibiscus is just about to die to the ground, and I don't know that this is the best time. Probably earlier in the season would have been the time to do it. You may, if you're in a southern area and it's still pretty vigorous, be able to just root a cutting at this point if it's still got some vigor. But the amount of time it would take to air layer it, it would have probably already be died back to the ground potentially. And maybe just a waste of your time. Just earlier in the season if you want to try air layering on herbaceous plants. Let's see. Okay, so somebody cut down a forsythia colony down to the ground, and that didn't kill it. It definitely will not kill it. If you cut forsythia to the ground, it's not over, that's for sure, unless you're pulling roots out of the ground. It didn't work. Now they want to use Roundup. Will that work? You can use some sort of chemistry to kill it, Roundup or whatever. It's still going to take a few seasons in all likelihood, unless you step it up from Roundup. Roundup typically works really well on non-woody plants. It doesn't work as well on a woody plant like forsythia. So you probably want to step it up to some sort of herbicide that kills woody plants, or get in there and dig some of those roots out. That's probably the best call overall. You're probably also going to have a hard time planting into this space unless you're getting some roots out of the ground. So for me, I would attack this by, cutting it back and then trying to get some of the roots out. It should be easier to dig those roots out, over the next year or two to create that space and not worry about using herbicide. But again, Roundup, as those pieces are coming up, will hurt it and slow it down and kill it over time, but not quickly. One really cool plant that is out here in the, just growing in this sand, is this Artemisia or wormwood. This one's Artemisia campestris, Dune wormwood, beach wormwood, all kinds of names for this one, but it's native up here in Ontario and then down in the States as well, but likes these sandy dune areas. And there are lots of different species of Artemisia. There's an Arctic species. It's probably not that far up north from here. This first year it stays in this kind of stage like this with this blue hue to it, and then the second year it sends up these seed heads, or the flowers and the seed heads. Really super interesting plant, and this is the only place you're probably going to find it is in a space that's very specific like this, just where, you know, the sand has blown in here along the edge of a Lake Ontario. Somebody has a hot lip salvia that's like 5 by 5, which is pretty daggone big. And they said it's woody, of course. At that point, you know, these perennials are going to be woody once they're that size. Heck, this Artemisia is as well there. Really kind of the difference that you'll notice between perennials and annuals. By this time of year, the perennial things are woody kind of down at the bottom. They've made some wood and they're going to come back the following year, where the true annuals typically are not, don't form any wood down at their base. They don't waste the energy for that. They're just trying to make seed as quick as possible. They want tips on moving the salvia. I would wait till the early spring to move it, and then you could cut it way back. I don't know how, depends on where you are as to how dormant hot lip salvia goes, because we can see them blooming right up until Christmas in our area, and then starting to bloom again in late February, older woody ones in the neighborhood. They actually bloom, they're actually cool season salvia. They're the only time of year they're not trying to grow and bloom is in the heat of the summer, really. But I would move it in the late winter, early spring, and then it should be pretty easy to get out of the ground and just cut it down to, you know, 12 inches tall and move it, and it shouldn't have any problem. Will be deep roots on something that big for sure. So it'll be a little bit of effort, but it should transplant just fine. There's a lot of questions on this caterpillar on the Baptisia. A lot more people saw it this year. It's this Genista broom moth, if I'm remembering that correctly, is the name of it. It's an imported caterpillar that just absolutely devours Baptisia. We had one in the front garden that we cut them off of and thought we had kind of prevented, you know, look, we went like 2 or 3 weeks without seeing any damage on them, and then looked back at some that we have back behind the vegetable garden, and they were just demolished really quickly. So it's all over North Carolina for sure. We didn't see as much of it as we moved north, but we did see it in a couple spots as we moved north on this trip through Virginia and Maryland and Delaware, and, you know, Baptisia is all over the place, you know, going north in people's gardens. And we didn't see it as much, but we did see it, and I suspect we're just going to see it, and it's something we're going to be living with. I'm sure people will try to get you to spray, you know, all kind, whatever on it, but I just have a feeling it's just something. I think they're going to come out of the ground, bloom well, and then where they were just such good, perfect little ornamental plants in the landscape, even after they had flowered, they may be less of that now because they just get eaten, just completely and totally devoured once you have these things. Somebody had just pointed out that Soil Cube veggie mix worked really well for them, and I'll say the same thing at our house. We used the Soil Cube compost in the vegetable garden in the ground. We used the Soil Cube veggie mix in containers this year, and all of our containers looked absolutely fantastic. It's a slightly chunkier version. It's got pine bark in it, I think, and that's what the chunkier part is, and we were talking about that earlier in here, and I think it really worked well for our containers. We gave our containers 0 additional fertilizer, maybe 1 additional time. We gave a small amount of fertilizer, but almost nothing. And that Soil Cube veggie mix did really well for us. There's a stand of small black spruces here, and I think my understanding is correct. It's the most common tree actually in Ontario. These are small ones here, and they're varying sizes in here. A lot of them don't look all that healthy on this sand. You know, as they've gotten bigger, they don't necessarily look all that happy to to be here. The ones that are taller, but this lower stand here is quite beautiful. Let's see, what is next on the question? Somebody has a Goshiki osmanthus in a container in Ireland, wants to plant it in the ground. Can they do it now? They're zone 9 equivalent. So just, it's cold. It feels really cold outside, but they don't get temperatures that are really, you know, all that cold. It's that San Francisco kind of cold to Ireland zone 9. It feels cold. Let's see. I would go ahead and put it in the ground now. If you got one in a container, it's definitely time to put it in the ground, and the fall is going to be the best time to do it. I probably would tip prune it a bit, especially if it's got a lot of new growth on it. I think you'd be better off reducing the top a little bit as you're damaging the roots to put it into the ground, but definitely now. Let's see. Someone has hardwood mulch they purchased that actually looks like compost on inspection. Should they use it as compost instead or use it as mulch? So if it had fully broken down and it's truly like a humus black material, then yeah, you could use it as a compost. But if it's only just kind of mostly broken down hardwood mulch, I would not want to mix that into the soil. So I'm just going to use it as mulch, just like you purchase it as, unless it's just literally completely broken down. I don't mind mixing that pine bark we talked about into the soil, but I don't want to mix hardwood materials down into the soil, because once they get to a certain depth where they don't have light and don't have air, they break down improperly, create anaerobic conditions. So I would not use it. I would just use it as mulch like you purchased it, unless it's completely and totally broken down and there's just no bulky material in it at all. Okay, let's see, one more question in this spot. Somebody has, they had a K-Paris magnolia, they cut to the ground and it's gone sucker crazy. Cutting them back seems less and less vigorous, and that's what you're going to get. Same thing back with that forsythia question. If you just keep cutting them down over the years, it's going to deny it light, deny it the ability to make food for itself, and that colony is going to slowly die over some period of time. Same thing. Can they cut and transplant one of these suckers? Not likely. It's attached to the old root system of that plant. And it would have to be really, really lucky to have one where you could actually take it off of the, dig it up separate from the other plant, because it's coming off a piece of wood that's under the ground that's attached to roots that are spread out all over the place. And so with a heavy, heavy root system, I think you'd be better off just buying a new K-Paris magnolia in this case. All about saving money on this channel, but I think this effort would be futile. What you could do though is root one, or from any of the plant propagation videos I have on the channel, or bend one of them down and root it in place so it just needs to be on its own roots and not that old root system of that old tree. I just don't think you're going to get it rooted otherwise. But again, you could bend one down onto the ground, cover it up, root it separately, or any other various propagation techniques that I've shown on the channel over the years. This is number 16. Somebody has a sunny garden in the summer and then it's wet and shady in the winter. Does this affect transplanting herbaceous perennials in the fall? No, I would definitely be rescuing them out of there before the wet, shady winter happens to them. I think you'd be better off, they're in 7B, Missouri, and where I might say that you want to transplant things on the other side of winter, maybe that would be the best time of year to do it. In this particular case, if it's going to be potentially damaging to them to be in that space during the winter time, I want to get them out of there. Even if you were putting them back in a container, you'd be better off doing that. Number 17, somebody wants to know the best time to move an Obsession Nandina in Greensboro, North Carolina. You could do it. They're zone 6 hardy, and you've been probably moved into zone 8A or something. I would still treat Greensboro as zone 7, but they're zone 6 hardy. If you wanted to move it now, you could move it now. Shouldn't be any problem to do that, or you can wait till the late winter if you're more comfortable doing it that time of year. Let's see. Okay, so somebody has a skimia and they've kept it watered and now suddenly it's drooping and it won't respond. I had answered this question on a farfugium a couple of weeks ago, where they had gotten a ton of rain and it had wilted and it was not coming back up. That person actually left another message that said it did pop back up eventually, so that was good. Sometimes you can save things as they're starting to go into that root rot, that root rot presentation, and sometimes you can't. But if you have a shrub that wilts like this and it's still wet or still moist, sometimes it could be you're looking at it at 4 in the afternoon and it's 95 degrees outside and it's just in a wilt that can't recover, it can't keep up fast enough. But if you're looking at it in 7 in the morning and it's in a wilt and it's moist, that's likely what root rot looks like. And if it won't respond to to the water, in all likelihood, it's gotten some root rot. Those are the harder things to recover from. Most plant death, I've said this, is, more things in ornamental horticulture, more things are loved to death than underloved, just we tend to overdo or plant things too deep, or, things just end up wet. And then once and I've said in the past, you can recover from underwatering things. They might look bad. They might go through a really long transition of coming back to life, basically, of coming back to what they look like. But you can recover typically from underwatering. It's just really difficult and almost impossible to recover from rotting the roots off the plant, right? Okay, 2 more, and we're going to do them in this spot. This is overlooking this beautiful space out here. Steph was hoping she'd see some sort of wildlife out here as we were coming through here the other day. There's more sand dunes off in the distance back here, or this sand has blown in, for whatever amount of time, but I can see Thuja occidentalis. We can see all kinds of grasses. This is a big grassy plain behind us. It's just beautiful, super striking space, and we're elevated above it, maybe 15, 18 feet on a sandbar right now, like it's the Outer Banks or something. Okay, 2 more. Okay, so does dry shade mean that once the plants are established, these plants won't need supplemental water? So if I said this is really good for dry shade, like cast iron plant or something like that, where I've said this one works really well in our dry shade space, does that mean it will ever reach a point where it won't need water? No, probably not. Those are the plants that you're probably going to have to keep an eye on. I don't think what we want with a dry shade plant is to be able to get to the point where it can compete without us worrying during normal times. But if you do that thing where we went about 8 weeks without rain in May and June, talking to a bunch of nurserymen and other people about it, how this summer went over on phone calls this past week, it's just kind of wild. We went just 8 weeks of really, really hot weather without any rain whatsoever. And then since then, it's been above normal rainfall, of course. And they're going to end the year and go, we had normal rainfall for the year, but we went 8 weeks of the worst part of summer with 0 drops of rain in our area. That's the kind of conditions that are going to come back around where your dry shade area is probably going to need to be watered. So I'm trying to put the things that I'm going to need to water the least that can get in there and compete, but know that your dry shade area, you probably need to be the first area you examine if you're in an abnormal situation later on, like we were this year in the Raleigh area and other places across the country. Number 20, and the last question for this week, this will be Jim's opinion, and these are always the ones that are interesting questions when you involve your opinion on anything. But this person needs an evergreen ground cover that's fast growing on a slope under some pines. She has Vinca major in some pots. Knows it can be invasive, but is it okay to plant because it will grow fast? Thoughts. This is the kind of thing that we've seen in our neighborhood and some older neighborhoods in the Raleigh area and other areas that we visit, is that folks plant Vinca or ivy or some of the really fat Euonymus coloratus or pretty short list of these evergreen, fast-growing ground covers. Maybe Liriope spicata, something like that. And with the best of intentions, I can control it because, this is the space I need to cover. I need to get it done. And then with time, maybe the house gets sold. Maybe the person becomes older and can't maintain it as well. Whatever happens, it loses control. And then it's in 4 neighbors' gardens. And that's what we see just literally everywhere we travel with some of these things. So I would proceed with caution on planting anything that you have to say, yeah, today I have no problem because it's just little plugs I'm putting into the ground. But in 20 years, what does this look like for me? Maintaining this garden, selling this house. It might be that you come in and try to use some slightly slower growing drought resistant things like we were just talking about, you know, cast iron plant. Well, I don't know where you are, but just some, you know, some things. Maybe go to Arboretum near you. Examine other gardens, what other people are doing on slopes in part shade conditions like this, and see what else you can use. It may take you a little more time, but may prevent you from a major issue that you're going to have in the future. So there you go. I'll just that's the way that I'll answer that one. So thank you guys so much for participating in these videos. Again, the weekly garden planner is $40 off for the month of September. Use the code September with a capital S, and to get that over on the HortTube with Jim Putnam website. Also, there's a couple of shirts that were purchased that we haven't shipped yet because we're not shipping them in Canada, but we did bring shirts with us. But as soon as we get back into the States, those will be shipped out. If you're the couple people, I think right now that are waiting for shirts, we were shipping them right up to the border, and then this little bit of time in Canada, we haven't shipped them. And those are over on the HortTube with Jim Putnam website as well. And we'll regular shipping once we're back into the once we're back into the States. And what else do I have there, Steph, to say on this? Ask gardening questions down below this video, and we'll pick from this one and last Sunday's video for this upcoming Sunday's question and answer video. Thanks for watching.